So the next discussion in Mark Black's essay regarding another one of Richard Wright's books, the 1945 autobiographical text, Black Boy. So the scene here is that Richard Wright is in a park outside a restaurant where he works, listening to a group of the white waitresses that also work there. And he says the following, right? I wish that Negroes, too, could live as thoughtlessly, as serene as they. They know nothing of hate and fear, and strove to avoid all passion. They lived on the surface of their days. For these poor, ignorant white girls to have understood my life would have meant nothing short of a vast revolution in theirs. And I was convinced that what they needed to make them complete and grown up in their living was the inclusion in their personalities of a knowledge of lives such as I lived and suffered containedly, right, in my body. So part of what's happening here in this text that's a little different than what is articulated in the scene between Bigger and Jan and Mary is that he, rather than just experiencing the anger of being erased, of being invisible in the context of the white world, that Richard Wright is able to here understand the nature of the interaction in a more complex way and the positive power that double consciousness has for the people who experience it. Right? This is the next part of the story, the notion of second sight, right? Because what happens in the context of the lack of double consciousness for those who live in the world of double consciousness but only see the outside, right? In this context, it is the white waitresses and others who see the world of people of color only through the visibility of their skin and the stories that are told of that. These are essentially, like we've been seeing, the notions of the Eurocentric tautology and so on. We'll get to that in a minute. But this sort of lack of awareness of double consciousness, this visibility and visibility matrix sort of alienates them in a way they don't understand, right? So for Wright, he's talking about the views of whites, deals with the views of whites and responds with an analytic critique that saves him from the miasma and consternation endured by Bigger. Right? So Marx talks about in his essay. Right? His double consciousness becomes a form of insight, of second sight, as DuBois says. Right? He's born with a veil, gifted with second sight. So this notion of second sight and the kind of lack of it in this context of double consciousness, like we've been saying, references back to, well, forward in the history, but back in terms of our course to the notions of epistemologies of ignorance and the Eurocentric tautology, right? The way in which seeing the world without this second sight, right? Seeing people only through the narratives of race and how those worlds are based on the fantasy stories that you have been told of those, put you in this world of the epistemologies of ignorance, Eurocentric tautology, where you don't know the world that you live in, right? You're living on the surface, as it talks about in that section. But also there's a way in which, living on the surface is a kind of positive part of consciousness, right? Because the way in which we exist in the world as forms of true self-consciousness are not inside our bodies, sort of constantly thinking about every thought that we have or how we are seen by others, trying to look at how you're looking at me. We just live our lives. We laugh when there's a joke. We move around in space and reach for something, or look across at something in the park moving by. Our world is sort of out on the surface, right? To live in a kind of functional way, to have a real true self-consciousness, we have to be able to externalize our consciousness out into the world. And so there's two parts of this, the positive negativity of double consciousness in the world that it creates. For those that have double consciousness, they can't live out in the world in a normal way because they're trapped inside their bodies being seen in this negative way. They can't just live in an ordinary way. But also that being trapped in that way allows you to see the way seeing happens in a way that people who just live on the surface don't, right? They don't see the structure of the way these Eurocentric tautologies and epistemologies of ignorance, of double consciousness, frames the world, the white world, right? In this kind of context as well.